Very rarely.
It's interesting as well because, you know, I mentioned that sort of allegory was about temporal displacement. Irony is more a sense of literal displacement. Like, whereas, like, as you were saying, we see sort of the aftermath of events and such. I mean, but that's also something quite interesting about the Jason myth. There's a weird sense of anticlimax to a lot of these. I mean, a lot of the actual episodes of, you know, them visiting islands, a lot of weird kind of slightly anticlimactical kind of stuff happens. I mean, like on one island, they just kind of sleep with a bunch of like smelly women, and then in another episode they kind of they like run away from something, you know. So it's kind of this weird kind of ironical thing where a lot of the time the central action, as you were saying, either happens off stage or it's sort of implied. And what we have to deal with is, as you were saying, sort of the interiority of the drama, as it were, people sort of ruminating or making sense of kind of what has just happened.
Well, in the original Argonautica, there's maybe a dozen, 15 or whatnot episodes where they go to islands and do this and do that. In a sense, almost a precursor to the Odysseus stuff.
Yeah.
But I gloss over most of that. I do actually, the island where Jason ends up going to meet and sleep with the women, I don't deal with that here. But I actually, in my book on the hero, which is a Western novel set in Texas in 1850, I do have a scene where those characters do meet a town filled with women that are up in the mountains here in Texas, in the Davis Mountains. And so you have to know where to use those types of things too. And if the essence of the play is to get to a more realistic reason as to why Medea killed the kids, a more realistic version of Jason as to why he does what he does and is so willing to give up the ghost at the end, you have to know what to use and what not to use. And you can assume, if you know the various mythos, just like you can assume with the Arthurian myth, you know, you don't have, you know, in the Arthurian plays, for example, I just gloss over the fact Queen Guinevere says, yeah, I had a one-night stand with Lancelot, and it was, you know, he wasn't that good in bed, basically. You know, that's a way of dealing with the fact, as presented in many other versions of the tales, but to put it in its own place, because that's not important with what I was doing. And in the same way, you know, it's not important to go to a dozen different islands and see the various stuff. I have one scene where they meet the Bebrycians, which is, I think, if I recall, it's on the Anatolian side, the south side of the Black Sea or the Inhospitable Sea, and we get a little bit of one of Tiphys, the guy who's the original not the oarsman, the guy who steers the craft. He ends up being killed. But that's just to give one example that they do go on many adventures, but we don't have to see. We can imagine that and the clashing rocks, which introduces Medea. Those are really the only two out of the dozen or more adventures that I deal with in the play, because it is interior, and it's more important how Jason and Medea and all the characters deal with what happens than actually seeing what happens. Again, we don't need to see, we don't have to have $1 million stage production to see the giant foot of Talos crushing a few of the Argonauts.
I mean, I suppose kind of the theme of this conversation, if not the plays, something that kind of is this sort of question of iconography, I suppose, or auto-iconography, you know, things repeating, stories being retold, and this larger question of, you know, why retell them? Why remake anything at all? And, you know, I suppose you could ask this of any one of your mythic plays, you know, like why, what changes in the retelling? And for me, kind of, it is kind of that kind of the elegance and the pathos, the bathos, even kind of that kind of you can bring into the story. But it's also, I'm left with this other question, I suppose, which is, like, why heroes really? Why there are lots of fabulistic stories. There are lots of things that. What is it about the hero? I mean, because you've done this in your novels too, where you've sort of dealt with these various. I suppose you could call them archetypes of the hero, the superhero, the cowboy, the super spy, as it were. Heroes, I suppose, are a staple of literature and of drama. And we have endless fascination and take endless delight in sort of recapitulating those tropes of the heroic and deconstructing, as it were. Like, what is it about the hero that kind of fascinates? I mean, I suppose not just you, but what do you think it is about the hero that fascinates?
It would depend on the hero. It's not heroes, it's individual hero. I mean, there are certain people I wouldn't ever want to write about. People would consider Winston Churchill a hero. He doesn't interest me. People would consider there's any number of war figures from the Second World War. Audie Murphy, who became a movie star in the 50s. He was a guy who was a heroic figure. Sergeant York from the First World War. They are
But
considered.
is history a parade of heroes? I mean, you joke rather ironically, or Zeus slash Danny jokes that perhaps call me the last great defender of the great man of history theory. Like, is that what you're doing? Are you defending sort of the great man of history?
Well, I think there are great men, great movers, but I think it's also a combination of the tides of history too. I mean, if you removed Adolf Hitler, we probably would still have had a major war. Maybe it would have come 10 years later, 1951 or 52. It might not have coalesced as quickly without as charismatic a figure. If you remove Stalin and if Trotsky had taken over, would he have been that much better realistically? I mean, I think.
But what do great figures, heroes, as it were, sort of make manifest? I mean, like, is it fate? I mean, because again, that you grapple with this concept of fate in so much of your work, Dan.
Well, yeah, I don't believe in fate, and the biggest divide of that would be the difference between art and science. Science is the living embodiment of the forces of history and nature over being greater than any individual. Because, like I said, if you remove Darwin, you still got Wallace. You remove Newton, you still got Leibniz, who makes calculus, and so on and so forth. But if you remove Kubrick, you'll never have 2001. If you remove Melville, no Moby Dick. If you remove Shakespeare, pick one of his top 5 or 6 plays. You won't have that. So, in reality, history is a mixture of the both. I mean, that's just obvious. There are people who wrench away. Without Walt Whitman, you would not have had a lot of the poets of. You wouldn't have had the Eliots and the Pounds to react against him. You wouldn't have had Dickinson getting published probably. But you would have had. But maybe later on, it might have taken another 50 or so years. You would have had poetry flowering and then collapsing on itself again, as it has in the last 40 years.
So perhaps the real theme or the real subject is history.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with myth, history, in a sense, almost always becomes myth. I mean, Douglas MacArthur was a real person, but his "I shall return" is as mythic a statement as you could make. And he wasn't himself a great general. He wasn't a terrible general as people have, but he's not in a league with the top 20 generals all time. He was just a guy who was a good politician within armed clothes. But again, "I shall return." I mean, that's as mythic a statement as any military leader has ever made.
But yeah, I mean, perhaps history as well. Kind of, we can also we were talking about sort of the ancient conceptualizations of history as sort of as a sort of a shall we say sort of a post-lapsarian kind of thing, a thing of sort of decreasing greatness, and sort of modern history as something which is progressive, progressive temporality. I mean, but perhaps we're caught between these ideas of cyclic and linear history as well. I mean, what do you? I mean, is history something that you think of as linear, or is it something that where we see, or are we going to see things coming around again and again forever? Is it continuity, or is it continuity with disruption?
I think history is like a coil. The coil progresses, but not as fast as it would if it was just a straight pipe. Things go around and around, and right now we're at a low ebb here in the U.S. and certainly probably the world with global warming. Figures like Putin and the Chinese communists still in charge. People like the Trumps and the Bidens, who are feckless idiots in Biden and active agents of idiocy in Trump. But I mean, I think you will come around.
That's a very interesting thing, and I've had conversations myself with people where they're talking about sort of history as a spiral. That's very a coil, you said.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because you have a compressor coil. Things move forward, but they don't move as fast. I think it was Carl Sagan in Cosmos who opined something like, imagine if, I forget, was it the Persians who sacked the library at Alexandria? Was it the Persians who did it? I'm not certain. But when the sack of the library of Alexandria, and something like, was it 60,000 or 600,000 scrolls were lost? Not only the art, but in the ancient world, there were certain cultures that were able to make batteries that could last almost as long as batteries made 100 years ago. Imagine, would we be out in the stars now if whoever barbarians or Persians or whoever it was, the Phoenicians, I don't know, who sacked the Library of Alexandria, if they hadn't sacked that, would we be 500 years further along in our process? Would the people in 1500 be like us? Would they have had cell phones in 1522? Who knows?
So like enlightenment, but also counter enlightenment, iconoclasm, as it were.
Yeah, unless you're one of those people who believe that that the Middle Ages never happened. You ever hear that theory about some people think that from the year 624 to like 987 never really happened or something. People come up with all of these Boltzmann brain.
Yeah, all this
is
weird
the Boltzmann
sort of
brain
crypto calendar stuff.
But
yeah, well, I think that's actually an interesting note to sort of leave it on, pulling back and talking about sort of the tapestry of history. And so, like, as we usually do in our conversations, I kind of want to pull it back to kind of where you're kind of going from here, Dan. Kind of, you mentioned your book about your cats. Anything else in the forefront of your mind?
Well, I'm gonna do that next, the kids' book, and hopefully you can do some drawings for me. We'll talk about that once I get it. That'll probably take 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
And then I've got other ideas for a World War II novel that I want to do. A novel about another professional wrestler from the 1970s named what's it? I got a Superstar Billy Graham. But then also, a lot of things come along. I still have to finish my last musical. I've done 2 of them. I got to do the third one, and I've got to set some time aside because they take longer. Because I have to pick the songs and then craft the story around the songs, and then I've got other plays. I mean, I've got plenty of ideas. I'll never run out.
I haven't read your musical plays, I admit. Like, so are they like jukebox musicals then? You're taking pre-existing songs and sort of stringing things around them?
Yeah, and I also have alternate scenes where, because most of the songs that I use are rock songs, and they are copyrighted, but I also then have alternate scenes using classical or non-public domain or public domain works rather.
I would love to see you write an operetta at some point. I mean, like, I know no one's going to tell you what to do, but like that seems like an interesting sort of in your
well,
working.
they are de facto rock operas. I mean, and the difference is I'm taking from an era, a time and place, and different. I don't have to do like Tommy and the Who and write all the songs about the thing. I can. I mean, I had, for example, there's there's a song by a group called Ramjam called Black Betty. And I used that song as the intro song for a black prostitute that I named Betty. And then there's a song by the Danish, no, the Dutch group, Candy's Going Bad. The guys who did Twilight Zone and um, Now I'm Stepping Into the Twilight Zone, and but a song called Candy's Going Bad, and I have a character named Candy because of that. So that now someone would, if that play was produced now, I'd get some lawsuit to say you can't, that character is based upon our song. Well, yeah, but the character herself is not. I totally make it something unique, but
transformational.
Yeah, but that's one of these days we should do a whole thing on public domain and copyright.
That's a whole conversation in itself, for sure.
Yeah, because copyright law in the U.S. and in the world is just ridiculous. I mean, it's so in favor of Walt Disney companies and these companies that, Walt Disney. I mean, fucking Mickey Mouse should have been in copyright, 20 years after Walt Disney died by 1980s. Same thing with James Bond, same thing with Batman. Yeah, you can use Mickey Mouse as your corporate logo, but that doesn't mean that, I mean, imagine people, well, we will get into it another time.
Yeah, and so you've done the musical. Are there other forms of theatre as well that might be tantalizing for you? I mean, I'm thinking, like, what are the various permutations of sort of stage drama? There's the musical. There's also, I suppose. Have you thought about, like, silent, anything that could be silent, anything without dialogue?
Well, I mean, there's the famous Beckett. It's not even a play where he's in a black thing and he's crawling around. I mean, I do have a couple of plays. My play.
You have certain elements within plays that sort of like seem to, like, reminiscent of those more kind of avant-garde things. But, like, I'm thinking of something like, Cantor's The Dead Class or something, like something that would be almost entirely down to gesture and sort of, stage direction.
Well, yeah, I've not read that, so I don't know that. But I mean, I do have things that are quasi absurdist. I mean, I did a play called "Lo Lord Thou Ridest" from a Hart Crane poem. The title comes from, about a hurricane that hits in Hawaii, and there seem to be some kind of extraterrestrial creatures afoot.
The most surreal play I've ever read from you is I forget the name, forgive me, but it was reminiscent of the Mariambad film. By Rob Grier.
Oh, the one where they're running around a hotel and the guy.
Yes.
Yeah. I forgive myself because I don't remember all the titles. I like making good titles, but I can like with these. I mean, just to give you an idea, we haven't even said the title of the play. So Argonautilus 1.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let me see. Let me bring that up here because off the top of my head. So Argonautilus 1 is a dream animal, and it has an epigraph by Lauren Isley, who appears in the Robinson Jeffers play. Then Argonautilus 2 is called, also has an Isley essay, A Shadow Among Shadows. Argonautilus 3 is called A Grace of His Own, and that has a John Donne epigraph to it. The Medea play number 4 is called, and it has a Hart Crane epigraph, A Fleshless Door, which is, I like the implications of them going somewhere else. And the final play, the 5th one, which is sort of Jason doing King Lear, is Bent Towards Some Flashing, which is also from a Hart Crane poem, and it has an epigraph from The Broken Tower by Crane. So
you always pick great titles, I must say.
Well, that's the thing. But yeah, to me, they're just the handles for the other people. For me, it's the first, second, third, fourth, fifth play. It's easier to remember. You know, when you write so goddamn much, it's hard to remember. Like I'll get people who'll email me this. I don't know if you saw. I had forwarded around some gal recently read a Norwegian in the Family, and you know, she said, "Oh, it was good." This I can't even go into all of it. I was sort of glad because a lot of times people will be like, Dan, I read the Vincetti Brothers, and you know that scene where this happens. That what were you thinking when you wrote it? I'm like, I barely remember the fucking scene, you know, because I've written probably published works probably 20, 25 million words or something, you know,
Yeah.
and it's like, you know, I can't remember every scene. There are some scenes with Paulie or Big Frank or Jason here that I remember, but come back in 5 years, you know, if I look back at the first 5 or 10 plays I wrote, I remember certain things that I do, and if I were to reread them, things would come back to me. But
Well, that's why I say you're the hardest working man, the hardest working artist alive, man. I mean, you inhuman, superhuman in the way that you're able to churn this stuff out.
But the thing, and I think I mentioned this to you before, one of the most important things for every artist to know is to learn how to forget. And I've told this to many an artist, is that once you've done something and you're satisfied with it, it's done. Forget how you did it. Don't forget what you did. Remember the techniques of how to do things. Don't remember the details, because then you'll start repeating yourself. And that's one of the ways to consciously not repeat yourself. When I do this, if you look, I don't know if I sent you, have you read the two musicals or not? If you look at them, they're quite different. But
I haven't read them so far.
okay.
No.
But yeah, so you always want to just move beyond it and let things lie and go on to the next thing, and so that you come with fresh eyes to something. So that if you're doing Jason, if I ever decided to do a trilogy of Odysseus plays, the Odyssey in a trilogy, I won't go back to the same thing. You have to find something in Odysseus that's different, you know, than what Jason was doing. Otherwise, you're just repeating yourself and you're not showing the growth. And too many artists get stuck in that rut. You have to go on. If you have a blue period, you need to go on to a pink period. You need to go on to a more abstract period. You need to get, you know, into a neo-realistic period or something. Or what is a photorealistic, not neo-realism. Well, if you're a filmmaker, go to try neo-realism.
Well, that sounds like a great place to leave it off on then, Dan. Like
Okay.
Dan's in his neo-real period or what have you. But yeah, thanks so much for talking to us, Dan, about the Argonautilus series.
And
thanks
you
again
for
for just
talking with
making
me.
the work that you do.
And thank you for being interested in it. I admired you, and you're a good friend to my wife, Jessica. So thank you.